When Trump won in 2024, I was upset, angry, and afraid, but not that surprised. Likewise for the transition the US has made over the last year from liberal democracy to competitive authoritarianism. Likewise for the UK's sudden lurch to the far right. For most in the mainstream media, however, they seem perpetually caught off guard, trying to catch up to a reality that is forever slipping from their grasp, trying to conform to a status quo that no longer exists, to urge compromise with people whose natures they have not understood. In the same time, something has changed in liberalism in the wild, in the larger public. The mainline Democratic primary electorate has always hated Trump. Now, I think their righteous anger has reached a point where they will no longer tolerate the obfuscation and appeasement of the columnist class. They've reached a breaking point with being forever told that they must understand the legitimate concerns of people who seek, in a very literal sense, to kill them or deprive them of their liberty. And I think all of that has created a shift. Almost exactly a year ago, I wrote an article called A Disease of Affluence for an online outlet called Liberal Currents that went viral beyond anything I could have expected. Since then, my following has taken a step change. I've gone from 5 to 15,000 social media followers. The podcast has massively increased its listenership. This month, November 2025, is already the strongest month ever in its entire 8-year history, with tens of thousands of downloads. At the same time, Liberal Currents has seen a meteoric ascent. They've gone from trendy blog to really genuinely influencing the public conversation, from mass readership to people with real power in our society reading them. I think we've both done stuff right, but as much as anything, I think people correctly feel like mainline centrist and liberal political commentary is not serving them right now. And I think they want alternatives. And we want to provide that. I recently started a fundraising campaign to invest more time and resources in the show, and Liberal Currents has just launched a Kickstarter. Both have been just so successful to date. Essentially, we both want to take what we're doing to the next level, to move from passionate hobbyists to building institutions. Institutions that will speak for an aggressive, resolutely anti fascist liberalism. A liberalism that understands itself as a fighting faith, that doesn't apologise for itself, that knows that protecting the rights of refugees or trans people is core to our values, that they're not a token on a board that can be sacrificed out of some imagined strategic cleverness. So I thought it might be interesting to bring you a conversation on that, to really explain where we're at, what we're trying to do, and why we're asking for support. So I chatted earlier today with Liberal Currents editor-in-chief Adam Gurri, and we talked about what we see as the problems with traditional media and what we think needs to come next. This is Building Opposition Media. Okay, I am joined by Adam Gurri, editor-in-chief of Liberal Currents. Adam, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I know what Liberal Currents is. You know what Liberal Currents is. Just very briefly, for people who are only podcast listeners, What is liberal currents?
So when Trump won in 2016, for the first time, a few of us felt that liberalism in America had sort of gone adrift. There was a complacency. Um, we had a model, Jason Brigham, one of my co-founders, specifically had the model of Jacobin magazine in mind, in the sense that they 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 were the voice of socialism in America at that time, which was an easy thing to do because there weren't very many people calling themselves socialists at the time. They're sort of riding off of Bernie. But in their case, what they were doing was, well, socialism as an idea and a word was completely discredited in America for a long time after the Cold War, even before that. Um, but there's an actual intellectual tradition there that's worth defending. That's not just the Gulag, So let's have a publication that actually talks about that. Um, in our case, it's almost the reverse, but it's actually a similar idea, which is liberalism is so dominant. It was so dominant for so long that people sort of forgot why it works. And its enemies had a natural advantage of always being exposed to it and its assumptions, and tailoring their approach from a practical point of view and their arguments from an intellectual point of view, to attack those assumptions. Whereas liberals themselves just sort of had the assumptions; they could rest on their laurels. So liberal currents was first started in a sort of a heady way to be, um, the home of exploring the liberal intellectual tradition, um, to understand why we care about these things, why they matter. And over time, we evolved to be more practical focused, um, as we wanted to be able to comment more on the specifics of what the Trump administration was doing, or why this reaction had happened in America and worldwide. Um, so there became more of a focus on history and social science and things like that as well. And then today, for the last 2 or 3 years, I would say, with the intensity of the second round of Trump, including anticipating it because it was pretty telegraphed in advance. Um, we focused on just becoming an opposition press. We still have our original mission. We're still a home for the liberal tradition of thought, and we still publish people like Matt McManus, who is chiefly a political theorist. Um, but our main focus now is opposing fascism, to put it bluntly, from a liberal perspective. Um, but opposing fascism, also providing a positive vision for what to do instead of fascism.
That's liberal currents.
That's liberal currents.
I want to get on to what's meant by opposition media, which I think you are doing very well, and I am trying to contribute to in my own small way with my projects. Let's just start though with what we see as the failing. Like, I think a lot of people have a perception that the mainstream press, and by mainstream, I don't mean Fox News, although we could perhaps also talk about what's going wrong there. But I mean, your New York Times, your CNNs, your Washington Posts, the sort of dominant legacy institutions. My feeling is, from just being on Blue Sky and what I published, there is a huge amount of frustration out there with the press from
Yeah.
liberals, and a real demand for an alternative, which is what I think both of us are trying to fill. But let's start with the problem. What, in your view, is wrong with the mainline American media right now?
Yeah. So, in my view, there is an asymmetry in American political media. Um, the right wing of it is very focused. They want to destroy liberalism, they want to slay the beast. They're at this point completely consolidated behind Donald Trump specifically, um, as a personalist would be dictator. Um, and they're no holds bar, and also they're billionaires. Just write checks to people who have even a modest amount of influence in order to make sure that they can keep doing it full time. Um, on the left, so to speak, basically center left and liberal press, um, the big ones are used to a world where they're the only game in town, which is long gone, decades gone. I mean, Fox News started in the '90s, right? And as you said, like Fox News, they're the biggest cable network. They have a huge online news audience as well. Um, so it's not even like you said, you can't even call them the mainstream press anymore. They're not really. That's not. all that they are. They are the center left wing of the mainstream press, and they are mostly focused on balance, and trying to win back the Trump voters and Republican voters who used to read them in like the 80s or 70s or something. Um, but which is an impossible task. But they set themselves up so that the crazier that the right gets, the more they have to drift in their position to at least be able to be in conversation with them. But it's a conversation that keeps getting refused. So the end result is that no one is very happy with them. Um, and from a practical point of view, they're not very well equipped for an actual personalist dictator attempting to consolidate power. So that's the problem. The other aspect of the problem is it's one thing to be political press in an ordinary consolidated liberal democracy. You could be frustrated that the side that your political side reads is less effective at promoting your points of view than the other side's is. That's fine. I mean, that's a problem from your partisan point of view. Um, but in the very near term, um, one of the top things that stops authoritarian consolidation from succeeding is an actually loud opposition press, loud, actually heard by a great bulk of the society. Um, and there's a reason that authoritarians, the first move they do is to try and crush the opposition press through acquisition, through jailing people, through using tools of like the tax authorities to try and defund them. Whatever methods they use, they try and suppress it because in comparative political science, they've shown opposition press is quite good at mobilizing broader opposition to the regime. Um, so if you crush the opposition press, an authoritarian could be quite unpopular, in fact, but their opposition is unable to coordinate. Um, so just actually having an opposition that opposes has incredibly high value, specifically in the situation we're in right now in America. So we don't even have to talk about is the New York Times and the way they do things in 2023 appropriate to how we want a liberal public sphere, participant to behave in principle, in the long run. Fine, that's a debatable point. But right now we're in emergency mode. We need to oppose. You know, that's sort of the elevator pitch for what needs to change in the media system today, both in the short and long term.
Yeah, let me add a point or two to that because I think there's multiple interlocking failings here, right? Another one would be I think their like theory of politics or framework through which they understand events is really flawed because I think people see what's happening with Trump and want a louder voice against it. I think people also want to understand it. They would like
Yeah,
this is a really confusing and disorientating situation, and
yeah,
people want, and this is sort of the value added of like opinion and commentary as opposed to just news reporting, is yes, you're sort of activating the base, but you're also giving them formulations and frameworks to help them understand what's happening. And I think the real failing, I think one of the real problems with, as I call it, reactionary centrism, the view that I think animates a lot of the New York Times or CNN, is underlying this sort of meet them in the middle instinct is a theory of politics that the far right is a backlash to the
yeah,
excesses of social justice, that it's
right.
woke went too far and provoked people. And that's just actually just really not a good understanding of what the modern far right is. And if that's the understanding you have in your head, you're going to be continually surprised by events. You're going to be continually kind of caught off guard as we see the people whose job it is to pontificate on politics are continuously caught off guard. And I think there's a dual failing of like they're not opposing, but they're also not understanding. They're not helping their readership understand. And in many ways, they're I go back and forth on whether it's intentional or not. I think largely it isn't. I think these are true believers. Like this is actually just what they think about the world.
Yeah.
Um, but they're obfuscating reality rather than helping people understand it. And I think people want to. I think people feel, not everyone, but many people feel in their bones that something is changing because it is.
Yeah.
And and the press should be helping people to understand that, not providing a smokescreen around it.
No, 100%. And I think this gets at um, so like you talked about the what should be the value of opinion versus reporting. So I actually think that at the New York Times and even at the Washington Post, even under Jeff Bezos now, and at a lot of places that are failing at the message and at the basic understanding, and of course at the headlines on the reporting itself is actually pretty solid. So like for someone like myself, who I think has a pretty good framework for understanding what's happening and why, it's still essential for me to read some of these reporting from these professional outlets because their reporters know what they're doing. They'll get facts about concrete details that you need to know, but the work of actually interpreting those details um, has not been done very well. And like so, like one of the few places I think that gets this right, and sort of fuses the two is, Josh Marshall's Talking Points memo, for example.
Yeah.
They have really good it's, just sort of, nuts and bolts reporting, but they have the right perspective on what the meaning of what they're reporting on is. But that's incredibly rare. And essentially none of the big, institutions have that.
Yeah, because I think there can be a perception that opinion is just like fluff, it's just like a top spin.
Right,
And you can't have politics without frameworks to because yes, you need the facts, right? But you also need to interpret the facts. Like I think the Budget Statistic Office produces 66,000 statistics a year.
right,
What are the important ones you want to look at? What do they
right,
mean and why? Like
right. Well,
just at a basic level, right?
and
You
just
need
well, yeah, and I would
theories.
say right, and I would say even as as a former econ student, um, even the statistics that those government agencies draw are themselves based on theoretical assumptions of how these things work. Right, like there's surveys, but they don't just give you the raw survey data. They're doing things like smoothing it out because they believe there's seasonal cycles, or they're giving you non-farm because they think that's more meaningful for the overall health of the economy and things. Like there's things that they do that are based in a pretty solid understanding, based on theory, but also empirical research married to theory. Um, so an example of what we have done at Liberal Currents, one thing that I hammer on is there is a whole political science, comparative political science, about personalist dictators specifically. Not totalitarianism, um, not um, not just any kind of authoritarianism, but the kind where it's not just like one party rule. It is one man who, either through his connection to some important political base, like Mao had, or more commonly, just a patronage network that he controls, um, is able to consolidate deinstitutionalize the government and make it so that it is just a tool of him personally. Um, and Trump essentially has everything, right? Like he has the MAGA enthusiasts who are why he's managed to consolidate control of an American political party in a system where parties are wide open things that no smoke filled room controls, because of the primary system. He's managed to consolidate control through his primary voters that are very loyal to him. But also, he has a huge spoil system. I mean, enormous, and it gets bigger every time he gets in office. Um, so there's a lot going on there. But that's we explain it through this this framework of actually understanding what he's doing based on what we know about how dictatorships work.
Let me add another element to that that follows on from what you just said, which is, I think, perhaps something I, in my own small way, bring to the table. Is I think you have to consider this in an internationalist perspective because, there just isn't a lot of precedent in American history, at least not living American history, really, for where we're at right now. International comparisons can help. I think also the global fascist resurgence
Hmm.
is clearly a global project and clearly
Yeah.
has international ambitions and has to be understood in light of that. And there's a critique of me which would go, and I'm not insensitive to it. On the one hand, I lived in America through most of my adult life and then returned to the UK recently. Someone could say, oh, well, you talk about American politics, you don't even live here anymore. But on the other, you could say, when I talk about British politics, well, you've only been back here a few years. What do you know? You're bringing all this American stuff over. And I sort of hear that. But on the other hand, the thing that is trying to take over the UK right now is the thing that is taking over America. It's the same people, like it's Musk talking at the Tommy Robinson rally,
Yeah.
right? It's not even the same ideas, though it is. It's the same personnel.
People. Yeah.
Um, and Trump suing the BBC right now, for instance.
Yeah.
And I think our media does both in the US and the UK, incidentally, a really, really poor job of having an international perspective and putting it in any sort of global context,
Yeah.
or comparing what Trump is doing to, as you say, personalist dictators that we've seen in history or in other countries. And, for all that we talk about as sort of international liberalism, in many ways, fascism is more international than us. Like
Right
it
now, anyway.
will, it
Yeah.
will put American fascists will put money into British fascists and resources and give them
Trump
prominence
Trump
in a
just
way that
gave Milei $20 billion or something, right? In Argentina.
liberalism actually isn't. And I've liked liberal currents. Because if I'm being honest, and I probably shouldn't say this aloud, I can publish stuff with you that I couldn't in the British press. Those
Mm.
two trans articles I wrote, sorry, articles about the state of trans rights in the UK, that's a
Yeah.
bit
Yeah.
flippant. I'm not sure even a liberal British outlet would have published.
Mm.
And that's just like a small example of international liberal cooperation, which
Yeah.
I think has not been done well by and large.
Yeah. I agree. We did, that's like we had an international liberal. So we had an international liberal project at the turn of the 20th century. We had an international liberal project after World War II, um, and in many ways there was one during the Cold War. But I think after the 90s, the international liberal project was sort of, well, we'll have supranational organizations, and we'll do free trade to some extent. Um, and then things will work themselves out. Like China will liberalize. There'll be natural processes that cause it to happen, essentially. And that's why you're caught flat-footed. Way before this stuff with the international reactionary movement um, was the big thing. One of the things that I was watching was the way that China would influence American cultural products um, by by just being willing to threaten them with economic sanctions. Movies and TV shows, and even like a basketball player I remember famously like tweeted something critical of the regime and had to like apologize because the NBA didn't want to be thrown out of China. Like that the international system that we set up as liberals was already being leveraged against liberalism before Donald Trump and Brexit and things broke onto the scene in 2016.
One thing I've written a bit about is, I don't think this caused the global far right resurgence. I don't think it provoked it. But I think it did leave it somewhat, as you said, flat footed, vulnerable, not very able to defend itself. Is there's been a tendency both within intellectual and applied liberalism to very carefully limit its scope and application. It's purely a political thing.
Yeah,
And even within politics, its role is quite limited to a sort of preservation of the system, a sort of like the metaphor I always use is like the referee of the game, not a player. We're just neutrally applying some baseline rules. And the problem with that is What's on the other side is they very clearly envisage this as a total war across all
Right.
institutions and
Right.
all aspects of culture. And
Yeah.
I don't know that a sort of this much more curtailed liberalism is really fit for purpose in that
Yeah.
scenario. If like, for one, they can just seize the state, but for another, even if we retain the state, but the press, universities, TV, new media, social institutions, the general tone and tenor of culture, the can you as a trans person walk safely into a bathroom, if all of that's in their hands, the state isn't going to save you. And
Right.
if they have all of that, they will probably also have the state, you
Yeah.
know?
But this is
Um,
this is this is the very kind of thing that we have talked about a lot since the very beginning, since like 2017. So one of our great inspirations is the political theorist Jacob Levy, who I think many more people should know about. In 2016, I was reading his work and just thinking, oh wow, like what I thought I knew about liberalism, I have to rethink because of how the way he works. So um, his big book, Rationalism, Pluralism, and Freedom, I think addresses the tension you say, because there, there's sort of both sides of it are correct. So the minimal version that you're talking about, you do need some version of that institutionalized, right? Because really the whole point of liberalism, as a first like stab, is we have to live with difference. Like social difference is ineradicable, um, and we need institutions that will peacefully, um, not referee, but like they're the nonviolent uh, arenas for disputes among very different social groups with very different values. Um, uh, and that's fine. We need that, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole point of free speech and open elections for that anyone can run in, and things like the whole point is that you have a country that is not going to be homogenous, including not homogeneously liberal, um, and you need institutional ways for people to be in conflict with each other on those margins without actually getting into violent conflict with each other. So that's one part, right? That is true. Um, but there's another part, which is just you can be a partisan liberal who believes in a more holistic liberal cultural vision. And you need that. You need both. So while you need those institutions that are just kind of like the peacemaking institutions, you need a strong fighting liberalism that is trying to actually enable a fuller freedom through things like you know education that actually enables people to be able to have more choices in a real society versus just saying you have the right to make choices but we're not going to fund so like a big dispute area here in New York is we have a huge Orthodox Jewish community. um, they have their own schools and many of them are quite terrible, especially like the girls just don't learn much of anything really. Some of them don't even speak English. Um, so they're not really well equipped to leave their community if they want to do so in the future. Um, so you know, a strong partisan liberal says no, we have to have minimum standards for education, and you are allowed to have your community that is very traditional, very patriarchal, or whatever, but your kids have to be set up so that if they one day want to leave, they will be able to. Whereas now it's they set up lots of impediment. Like it's sort of the nature of those communities that they set up a lot of social impediments to leaving. So the partisan liberal vision is actually we we do much more to enable true freedom, essentially, like a more thoroughgoing vision of freedom that penetrates um, uh, every level of society. And then we're not just tolerating difference. Um, we're also seeing the value of some forms of difference, at least, like understanding that um, having people from different backgrounds and perspectives actually means the system overall is more likely to produce innovations and thoughts and perspectives that in a more homogenous society you're more likely to get groupthink. There's a lot of actual bad benefits to diversity. Ryan Muldoon is a writer who's written a lot about this. um, his perspective, which is sort of my perspective on the whole full package of liberal democracy, including the society of people who value liberalism, is it's difficult to achieve, right? So there's like this literature that says, oh, would you get diversity? Actually, people are less likely to support welfare and government safety nets and things because they think it's going to go to those people, kind of thing. His Muldoon's argument is diversity is harder to do, but it has higher payoffs. Like the more diversity you get, the more tension there is, so the more potential for conflict, but also the more potential for benefits through this cultural exchange. Um, and that's my take on liberal democracy too, which is it is one of the hardest systems, including like social systems, not just political, to get in the first place. Um, but it's also one of the easiest to maintain because the benefits, once you get them, are quite clear. Um, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, my perspective on that is perhaps a little different and even more on the militant side than even you or Levy, in that I just start from we want progress, we want people to have good lives, and we want people to be happy. And once you sort of map out what that means, I think for all its challenges, a pluralistic society is a better way to support it. But I start from the comprehensive place. I don't start from the sort of, we just have to acknowledge difference as a fact of life. I mean, that's a true thought. I don't know that it's absolutely my bedrock, but that's a sort of fine-grained philosophic distinction. I think, though, staying on this sort of tension between a sort of neutralist liberalism and a comprehensive one, I think what we've seen, and to bring it back to the press, is while I have my disagreements with a Rawlsian neutralist liberalism, it's not an evil, awful thing. I think what's happened in the era of Trump is some practitioners of that have mutated into a real perversion of it. I call reactionary centrism, in that instead of just saying, oh, we have to sort of neutrally apply the rules, they say, oh, we want to be in the middle, we want to be neutral. But when the right is sliding towards outright fascistic things, you end up trying to simultaneously both enforce liberal values and not. If your main thing is enforcing liberal values, if you just stay true to a sort of pure Rawlsianism, you end up in a sort of Alassianuti, Gabriel Badano type place where you just have to say the modern right is outside of the overlapping consensus. They're not reasonable people. That's one way. The other way you can go is the sort of Ezra Klein, Matty Iglesias sort of way and say, we have to recognize what we have in common. We have to find a center point. And I think that's a real perversion of a type of liberalism that I don't even think is the best type of liberalism to begin with, because it's delusional. There is no compromise point, and you see that very clearly, I think, with our current Labour government in the UK, who said, okay, what ground do we have to give on immigration or trans rights in order to satisfy the other side? And what you end up with is not just very illiberal, but incredibly incoherent and messy and stupid. And I think that's what that is in many ways. The sort of, we have to find this middle point, we have to hear them out. And not only do we have to hear them out, we can't even really articulate our side. You're never allowed to just come out and say, actually, I think immigration's a good thing and makes society better and makes our economy stronger. And especially in England, America's a rich country. England, my God, we would if we stopped all immigration, do you have any idea how hard we'd screw ourselves, right? You're not allowed to just say that. And yeah, it's become a perversion of it. It's hopeless whenever it's actually implemented, and it's not even that popular. Like, there's no voting bloc behind this. Most people either support the fascists or they oppose them. There's no voting bloc for this sort of, let's hear them out. And yet, that is all we ever hear from.
Right. Yeah. So the actual three groups are for, against, and disenchanted, like not engaged. Right. That's it. It's not there's not a centrist constituency. And it's simply a category error, right? It's a category error to try and act like you have to be within the system. You have to, even if you believe in pure Rawlsianism, right? Even if you're a Rawls guy in terms of how you think liberalism should work. It's a category error to say that you, the person in the system as it is implemented, have to also be a neutral arbiter. Like, whether you're a person or an institution, a private institution like the press. That's just a category error. You could have the most Rawlsian political system imaginable, and it would still make sense for you, a part of the press, to be pushing a particular perspective and worldview. And I think part of why it gets conflated is because there's an old economic model that is dead, where the only way you make money is by being as bland and mass market as possible. But that's long gone. I mean, that's been gone practically my whole lifetime. It hasn't made sense. Um, but there's old institutions that just can't let it go. And like the New York Times specifically, and of course even the Washington Post to some extent, they have something else going on there, but it's a similar, at least, rationale that they give. Um, they specifically say that they are trying to win back those readers, which doesn't even make sense because
You're not going to.
well, and also in the 70s and 80s, the main readers of the New York Times were not conservatives and liberals across the country. They were people in New York because in the past they were just local. Like their main readership model was almost 100% local. So it's not like they're really going back to some moment in the past where they had a national, consensus that they were in the middle of. They're almost trying to be like one of the big three networks that we used to have in the 70s and 80s, like ABC or NBC or CBS or something, the kind of viewership that they had. But it just doesn't make sense. The market doesn't work that way anymore. The industry doesn't work that way anymore. And all you end up doing is pissing off the people that would be your biggest engaged audience, essentially.
Yeah, to the point where people want alternatives. So what do we need? What do we need more of?
Well, obviously, what we need is to subscribe to Liberal Currents. We are doing a fundraiser, as are you. We are trying to just bootstrap our way through the enthusiasm and support of people that trust us to not make that mistake, based on our track record. What we actually need are more places like, like I said, Talking Points Memo, and similar places like them that actually are looking into the details of what's going on, can explain it clearly, and are fighting for liberalism. Like they are actually saying what's happening is bad, and it's bad because they are fascists and we're liberals. And if they win, they will destroy us. That's what they're seeking to do: is destroy people like us, people like our readers, and destroy the society that we know and value. And never mind the path to improving that society in a more liberal direction. Um, so just we need clear-eyed outlets that are very good at articulating what is happening, and explaining it to their audiences, and then have the reach that actually reach enough people. Whether that's reaching a big mass audience or reaching other influential people that have big audiences and shaping the way they think. The reverse of this is my understanding of the trans panic in the UK is there wasn't much of a mass constituency for it, but they kept publishing it, and it sort of consolidated the British elite around
Yes.
a perspective. Yeah. And then, of course, I mean, it's only inevitable when that happens. It's only inevitable that their influence to their constituencies spreads. Even if it never reaches a majority, it gets bigger than it would have been, right? Donald Trump, similarly, in 2016, he did not really win on immigration. He won on, Hillary Clinton wasn't popular. He himself wasn't that popular, but we have a weird institution for picking presidents. And there were just 80,000 votes spread, in particular geographies that in our system meant that he won, right? Immigration was not a top of mind item on most American voters' agenda, according to all polling on the matter in 2016. But once he became president, and once he became the man of the GOP in this country, immigration became this huge salient thing. I would say that anti-immigration sentiment in this country went way up because of his success, right? So there's you can have the two angles. You can be a media outlet that has a mass audience that you are being having your consistent opposition message to, which is definitely valuable, very, very valuable. But you can also make a difference by shouting at elites and consistently parsing this for them in a way they had not thought to think about, and moving them and moving their constituency with them as well.
I think it has to be both, and I
Oh,
think
it
liberal
does have to be
currents.
both. It
I
does
think
have to be
liberal
both.
currents does both quite well. I mean, I think over the last 2 years, I don't have the readership stats in front of me, but
Yeah.
your reach has like gone
It
up.
went up 600%. Yeah.
Yeah,
Year over
but
year.
also you are finding your way into more elite. I mean, I got my start as a writer with liberal currents, and that got me enough prominence that I can write for much more sort of historic publications now. And like the stuff that goes there does find its way into elite
Yes.
stuff.
No.
I think it's both. I think people can
Yeah.
really get fixated on it has to be either a top down or a bottom up. You kind of and the
So you do need
successful
both. You
yeah, the
100% need both. I
successful
agree.
movements for progressive causes have always been both. So the
Yeah.
sort of movements that built welfare states under FDR or Attlee were self-consciously a matter of elite capture, but also mobilized public opinion behind them. There's a brilliant Attlee speech just before he's not known as a charismatic politician, but just before the 1945 general election, where he sort of says, we are a cross-section of society. Our
Mm.
party represents economists and day laborers. We represent farm workers and farm owners and artists and artisans and thinkers. Our goal is to make our case to the entire spectrum. And like
Yeah.
that's what works, and that was
Yeah.
transformative. Or the neoliberal movement of, Hayek and Reagan and Thatcher that undid a lot of that, self-consciously did both as well. It was
Yeah.
self-consciously, we're going to target elites, but also we're going to build up media presence for a broader thing. I think it has to
It
be.
has to be both. No, 100% agree. Yeah. Agree. I think
Um,
it's easy, like, when talking about these things, it's easy to focus on one or the other, I guess is the point I wanna make, but there are both, and they are both important. 'Cause one thing that can happen is you can have a constituency. One thing you don't want is a headless thing. If
mm,
you can build, I mean, this is very uncommon, but it is possible to build sort of a mass audience, and get ignored by elites, and it take quite a long time for the ideas that are percolating there to actually be taken up by someone in a position to do anything about it, for example. Um, you do need both, I guess, is the short version.
Yeah, and if you're going with the elite capture model, the civil rights movement is another very good example you could give
Yeah.
of that. It tends to be like a generational thing. Like there's a good 15, 20, 25-year lag between the first really concerted effort to like let's make this let's capture the
Yeah.
elite and to it
Yeah.
actually getting payoff. Even like a very fast example, and the trans rights one in the UK is like that.
It is.
Even
It's
that
nuts.
was about 15 years from when they
Yeah. No, I
really
agree with
first
that.
started kicking off about it to
I agree.
the regime we see today. But, and I'd say this is what I really try to do, is it is also a matter of giving self-consciously ideologizing the sort of maybe not everyone in society, but like the sort of the bases, I would like maybe like in America, the Democratic primary electorate. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of people who are very political in terms of they have values. I think there's a lot of people who have clear liberal values
Mhm.
and who self-consciously want to develop those values, to think about them more, to sort of understand their context and what they mean, what's happening. I believe in freedom, pluralism, and everyone having equal rights. What does that look like in this moment? What's the ideas and history of that? Why is it so under threat now specifically? And I think one of the problems is like that sort of like smart podcast, and I'm using scare quotes around smart. All of the people do. I think it's a really valuable thing, and I think people really want it. They want to develop their political values and their political ideas. But the people who do it have all drunk very deeply from the compromise with fascists. Well, like Ezra Klein, I like in a lot of ways. I've listened to a lot of his podcasts. Like learned a lot from it. He has good people on. He's whatever else he is, he's not an idiot. But he's just taken a hard turn down this. You have to see it from the fascist's point of view line, and it just poisoned that. It's so intellectually bankrupt and it's so dangerous that it just poisons everything else that he does. You could talk about Matt Iglesias, although he's more of a troll now, in a similar vein. You could talk about all of the New York Times podcast's output. Like, that's sort of my niche, and what I want to do is like this. I think for both of us, right? This was just a hobby for the longest time, and now we're in this moment. It's like, no, I actually want to do this properly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so I've written about opposition media, and just sort of its role in authoritarian systems. Um, and to your point about consolidating an ideology, and also to go back to what I said before about sort of liberals having a lot of assumptions, but feeling complacent and not needing to know why those assumptions were valid. Um, Part of what media does is, uh, it gives people what there's a term called reflective beliefs, and it's something that people don't necessarily believe, but they believe they're supposed to believe. Um, and in politically, that can be much more important than earnest beliefs a lot of the time, because you sort of believe, if I'm the kind of person who's a liberal or a conservative, this is what I'm supposed to believe. Most people don't have strong opinions about political philosophy and social science and things like at that level, right? But they if they have some at least mild curiosity, they at least want to know what's the right answer. Even if I'm not going to do the work myself to figure it all out. So a good opposition media consolidates people around a set of ideas that they all know they're supposed to believe and say. And that isn't to say that like it's a dishonest belief, right? Like it's not. This isn't saying like just come up with a narrative and have people mouth it whether or not they believe it. It's more that like ideology beyond just forming genuine beliefs, ideology is also a mechanism for coordination. It's saying it tells a story of here's what we need to do, here's why we need to do it, and here's why we care about what we care about. And people who are not like full-time intellectuals or in the idea space, um, may have like more or less straightforward relationships with how strongly they believe that. But as long as they know, hey, in our group, this is more or less the ideas that have been articulated. Um, then you're more likely to actually coordinate an opposition, effectively. Assuming, of course, those are good ideas. Like the quality does matter too. It can't just be anything. Um,
And to give
but
that a
yeah.
concrete case, one of the trends which is both really weird and kind of funny is I think in some ways the Democratic primary electorate is now more radicalized than their politicians, right?
Yeah.
They really, really like. I did a big research project of like, it should be out soon with TNR. What I called fascism's Cassandras, the people who feared the worst from the beginning, and what they kept saying is fight, fight, fight. And they don't feel like Democrats are. And I think what's really useful in that scenario is I think it is useful to have the base yelling at the politicians to fight, but to formulate a specific list of demands, or at least a framework for thinking about that. Because it's easy to just yell at Chuck Schumer. I've yelled at Chuck Schumer. You've yelled at Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer needs yelling at, right? But also, it can't just be a reflexive hating on Democrats, as I think some parts of the Bernie left can fall into. I think it needs to be a specific. Here is the 5-point plan that we want them all to sign up to. This is what we're going to use our voice to yell about. And this is, this is how we're going to grade them in primary elections, so on and so forth. So that, because I think some Democratic politicians can feel, perhaps not totally unreasonably, that there's this sort of annoyed lefty contingent who are going to yell at them no matter what. And I think what we can do is play, as you say, a bit of a coordinating role in saying this is the five or however many things we want everyone to sort of sign off on. Any Democrat can sign off on court reform, right? Any
Yeah.
Democrat, like make it just easy and simple. These are the things that we want you to back. And please, I don't even care if it's sincere. Just put your name to it, right? Because what's not going to work is if everyone has their own vision of what needs to happen and is voting on like their own 12 different things, or doesn't really know, or just has a vague desire, however valid, that they want Democrats to fight. You do need that coordination of like, this is what we need you to do and say. And I think that is a service that we can provide.
Yeah. No, and that's something that we tried to do a lot. In the last year, that is something that's been the number one thing that I have tried to focus on. For example, before the election in 2024, I pre-wrote something for the case that Trump won, and it was essentially, here's every single institutional mechanism that could be used by a Democrat in any jurisdiction they control in order to sandbag the federal government if they're trying to do fascist things. Um, and then earlier in the year, when Trump started writing those executive orders targeting big law firms that for often very arbitrary reasons, and the firms would come essentially begging to make a deal to him. Um, my concern is once they start doing it, there's a bandwagon effect where all the other ones will then, fold. Even though big, well-funded law firms are, by definition, in the best position to fight these things in court. So my suggestion, which I didn't expect to be taken up, but just wanted to show it as an example of how you think about this kind of problem, was that state bar associations should issue a statement uh, clarifying that response to the executive orders is a disbarable offense based on the oath that you take when you pass the bar in that state. Which I think there's a very strong case you could interpret it that way. But the state bars are the ones with the institutional power to actually do that, as well as the state governments of if it's a Democrat jurisdiction like New York, where many of these law firms are based. You can put into law, or the executive branch can say they're interpreting it that way, or again, the state bar can just unilaterally say, "Hey, um, we interpret this as a violation of your oath that you took in order to practice law, and we're not going to punish the people who've done it so far because we didn't say that. But anyone doing it moving forward, you're going to lose your license to practice. The only reason you're folding is because you're afraid your business is going to go under potentially if you try and fight. But it will 100% go under if none of your lawyers can practice law. So it's things like that you need to be able to say. And I think like very few people, even now, even among pretty committed opposition figures, there's very few people that are thinking at that level of like that, turning the screw like that. Whereas that's like what Project 2025 is, right? That's 100% what the right wing spent decades doing, but also specifically the time that Trump was out of power doing, is finding where the mechanisms are to turn the screws. But we can do that too. We still have a lot of mechanisms in this country.
We're both trying to fundraise for ourselves right now. What would that do for liberal currents if you met your goal? I'm thinking specifically just because it follows on so neatly from what you just said you mentioned a project called the Opposition Papers.
It's the Reconstruction Papers, but
Oh, I apologize.
like it's fine, it's fine. In fact, it's kind of funny. Reconstruction is on a lot of people's mind. I've noticed. I've seen the term come up a lot, which I guess makes sense. Um, but yes, something we have tried to get off the ground this year, but have sort of been frustrated mostly by our own inability to have the time to commit to it, is a collection of essays which we will publish. We're a digital publication, but we'll have a published paper version um, that we would pay subject matter experts to write essays in their topic areas that essentially say not just how are we going to repair the damage that Trump has done to the federal executive branch, the university system, the way that we fund science and medicine in this country, but now that there's the wreckage, how do we rethink? There were things that had gone wrong before Trump appeared on the scene. We had a pretty good model that lasted for a while, but it had grown very stagnant, and there were a lot of problems with it. Now he's coming like a wrecking ball. Let's rethink. What can we take? The basic principles are sound. Government needs to support education and science and medicine and knowledge advancement. The federal executive branch needs a large, independent, set of agencies that just implement the law passed by Congress faithfully. The basic gist was there, but the actual implementation had, as all institutions do, grown it needed some reform before Trump came along. So now he's come like a wrecking ball. You, expert on higher education in America, please write us a comprehensive essay about what we can do to not just fix it, but make it better than it was before he came. You, expert on bureaucracy in America, how can we have a more responsive, more effective federal executive branch than we've had since Reagan essentially sandbagged it, and it got worse and worse over time. So it's a bunch of it, but also this, like you said, this isn't just about the federal government. This is socially, what should we do? What should we do about the media? What should we do? What should we do in terms of civil society in general? So we want to have a comprehensive package of these essays from real experts on their topics to give to people, and it'll be for anyone who wants them, and we'd love for, again, policymakers and elites as well to give them a read as a starting point for conversations about this stuff.
I think that
But
sounds so necessary and
yeah,
important.
no. So Samantha Hancocksley, one of our big stars and an associate editor, and one of two people who, if we are fully funded, will likely go full time working on the project. She went to a conference this year about liberalism, in fact, in DC, and there were a lot of luminaries there, influential people in the liberal sphere in America, and her perception was these people all recognize how bad the problem is. For the most part, they're not blind, but they were completely gobsmacked, and they just have no idea what to do next. And I will say, when reaching out to some subject matter experts that I respect a lot for this project, one of them literally said to me, I wouldn't know what to say. Like, he understands, his subject area really well, but in terms of like having a vision for what to do next, especially after this mess, he just said, I literally don't know what to do. So, we want to find people who know their thing and have an idea of what to do, and bring them all together and just give it to people. Because I think if we had had that in our hand when Samantha went to that conference, we just would have handed that around, and a lot of people would have been very receptive to what it would say. So there's just a lot of people, and you mentioned Ezra Klein. Frankly, my read of Ezra Klein isn't even that he's trying to be a centrist. I think that, based on what he said publicly and elsewhere,
He doesn't know what to do.
he also just is completely at sea, like a lot of people. We grew up in a certain country, and now we're in this situation, and a lot of people just don't know how to adapt. And so what we want to do is grow to be in a position where we can say, here's what we need to be doing. Here's what we need to be doing as media. We'll be an example ourselves. But also, here's what we need to be doing in all these areas. Here's the program we need to be following.
Let me build on a point you made, and this is going to sound a bit nuts and bolts and maybe even mercenary, but this is just how things are. Is You said transition two people to full-time roles. Like, we don't need to go into the full organizational planning specifics of it, but there is just a fundamental limit you run up against of what you can do as a hobbyist. There just is. And I
Yeah,
think in any other field, we would understand this, right?
right.
And contrast that with the right. One of the things I always say is the right pays its propagandists, and we don't.
Yeah,
And it always amuses me when there's a certain type of internet socialist, shall we say, who, when you say something they don't like, accuses you of being a sellout. And it's like, dude,
to who?
mainline
Yeah,
mainline liberal is the worst ideological lane to make money
yeah,
in.
yeah,
By far, it's
yeah,
not even close. There is so much money on the right, and there's even a little bit of money on the sort of Young Turks annoying lefty side, like
yeah,
being like, I want liberalism to work. The Democratic Party is profoundly uninterested in paying its
yeah,
propagandists. The
yeah,
main machinery of institutional liberalism is pretty exclusionary
yeah,
in many ways.
yeah,
Now, what people will say is, oh, but the right has all these billionaires and we don't. And I actually, one, I don't think that's true.
no, it's not
Like,
true.
Like, both Trump's strongest support and his strongest opposition are cross-class coalitions.
Yeah.
There are plenty of affluent liberals, but
Yeah.
there's also plenty of liberals who are like middle-class professionals, who are doctors and lawyers and
Oh yeah. Yeah.
what have you, who can maybe not give you 1 million, but could give you a few $100,
Yeah.
right? And I think we have to be real that and also what we're talking about isn't, in the grand scheme of things, huge sums of money. But I'll give you an example. I wrote those two trans rights articles for you, right, for Liberal Currents. Probably I would say the number one critical comment I got, apart from the just deranged stuff on Twitter, the number one critical comment I got went something like, well, it's actually very simple. What Codswallop's saying is that this type of British guy who thinks using an old-timey word like codswallop makes what they're saying smart. And so they say, what codswallop? It's actually quite simple. Just go in the toilet of your birth gender. And it, always in that form. And what it made me think is I know that guy. I know him. I know the type of prat who thinks using a word like nincompoop makes them clever and like an Oscar Wilde wit. And so I want to do a 1 minute video where I play both characters. I play that guy and myself. And it's like something that could go on TikTok or YouTube, just something that shows up in your feed
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
like, oh, what codswallop? Just use it. Okay, here's why it's actually complicated.
Yeah.
Even if you don't think trans people are valid, would that mean trans men going in the women's room? Number two, that's not what the guidance says. It says you have to use gender neutral toilets, which most pubs don't have. So what then? Just like a minute of like, here's the most common objection. Here's why it's actually total BS. And like, whatever you think about trans people, there is no clean, coherent way to implement this.
Right.
And I just realized to do it would be like a week of my time. Plus, I'd probably have to invest in equipment. Because when you see these little snippets that show up on your
No,
TikTok,
there's a lot of work that goes into it. Yeah.
and I think people don't see that because it
Yeah.
sometimes just looks like someone, like a little clip that's come out of a podcast. But when you
Yeah.
watch it with eyes of someone who've done this, there's multiple camera angles, there's professional lighting. I think they've
Yeah.
clearly done multiple takes. And
Yeah.
then just the post production, the editing is a massive job.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And like, I could make a quick clip of me talking into camera and saying that, but to do something that's fun and that would like catch people's attention,
No, it's a lot of work. Yeah. It's a lot
you
of
know,
work and resources. Yeah. Yeah.
and there's just a limit. My circumstance is a bit weird. I have like 3 jobs right now, right? And I sort of balance them all part-time.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like for the longest time, the podcast was a hobby. I had a little Patreon, and that paid the costs of having a website and hosting and so on.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
It was fine. I just did it for fun. Um, and now I've seen a bit of a step change in my following. I'm a bit like, I want to devote more time to this, and I can do more if I have more time. But I think there's a reluctance on our side, which we've both clearly gotten over, about fundraising, of like, actually, like, at some point, you need to transition hobbyists into institutions.
Yeah. Yeah. With us, it's, our path has been funny. So I found it easy to fundraise so pretty much until now, almost 100% of our revenue that we generated, we just gave to authors. So in many cases, we are publishing professionals. We're paying professionals, we're publishing them, professional writers and academics and things like that. But we ourselves all have day jobs, which allows us to maintain a certain independence. We're not, there's no strings attached to the money that's going to make us make any decision. But also kind of trapped us in a dynamic where, as our funding level increased, it was mostly just going to authors, and there was going to be difficult to make this leap to, okay, now we're going to increase our funding by such an amount that we can pay a whole salary, for someone, where we've never done that before. And that's what this fundraiser is partially trying to do. As you say, there's more to it than just paying salaries, though. I mean, there's all this stuff around it, and of course, like, I mentioned the print thing. If we were to do the reconstruction papers, we would pay graphic designers to make it an actually glossy, publication that looks really good, instead of just something that we put into a PDF and sent off to a printer. So, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. Then, there's having the time to actually connect with other people that can provide resources or assistance, and infrastructure and things like that. So, there's a lot more to it than just paying salaries, but you do have to pay the salaries.
And I think I don't get me wrong, I love what I do. I love doing this, and I think it has value. I wouldn't be this nuts about it if I thought this wasn't a moment where we're at a real inflection point and there's some very, very dangerous outcomes on the table, but also potentially hopeful ones.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly right. Yeah,
but yeah, people like I say, like it isn't just a matter of firing off a few tweets. To build a new media infrastructure
yeah,
is an institutional thing, and we have to treat
yeah,
it like that. And one of the reasons we've been so behind on our side, we're 15 years behind the right at this point on building new media infrastructure, and we just have to treat it like institutions you have to build, I think.
yeah.
What are we asking people to do?
Well, we
How
have we
can
have
people support liberal currents right now?
yes, we have a fundraiser. It is on GoFundMe. Um, we're trying to raise $500,000 so that we have the money to pay full-time people, and shore up the basic foundation of operating a business, which takes a great deal of work with lawyers and accountants and things. Um, and invest in these new lines of content that we're going to do. Things like the reconstruction papers is the one we've been trying to do this year, but we're going to do a lot more stuff like it if we get funded. And then we will expand into video a lot more. It's I've written about this sort of like the hierarchy of how influential different mediums are for the mass public. Video, essentially, live video is by far the most in terms of its effect because of the effect of when everyone knows that everyone else is also watching something, that live thing, that affects that level of sort of like intersubjective perception. So if everyone knows that everyone else has received the same message, you're more likely to get those effects that we were talking about of consolidating an ideology around a group. So live video is essentially the most potent form, then just video in general. Um, and sort of it like goes from there. Unfortunately, text being at the bottom, sad for us writers. Um, um, but the bottom is not zero, to be clear. The bottom is not zero, and we will do a lot more writing as well. But yes, we have this GoFundMe. If we get funded, we will leap to being truly an opposition organization, a media group, fighting the consolidation of authoritarianism in our country. Um, we, dedicating 5 days a week at least, to doing so, going and connecting with other people that are doing good work, and trying to build up that national and international, as you say, movement, to not just defeat the current enemy, which is a big task, but to lay the foundation so that it doesn't come back. In America's case, in 4 years or 4 years after we throw them out of the office, or we're not just caught. So we avoid both Donald Trump winning now and getting stuck in a recurring cycle of Democrats sometimes controlling things here and then handing off to fascists every 4 years.
Yeah, and once the match fund comes in, you've got to 20%, right? You've already passed your first
That's right.
100K.
Yes, that's
That's
right.
incredible.
It's in the first 2 days. Yeah. No, it is incredible, and it's a sign. It's a sign of the trust that we've managed to build over the years that we've existed. So we've been around since 2017, and we've been building just this community that whole time. And that's how I always thought of it. It's a publication, but the more important component is the community. We have a Discord server. We've always had sort of a group chat around it. And that's sort of the most active, integrated component of the community. But then we have patrons, who get some communications that not everyone does. We have free subscribers, and then we just have people that read us on social media and stuff. Um, and I'll just encounter someone talking about us. And since we've done the fundraiser, a lot of those people have come out of the woodworks to talk about why we should be supported. So
It
no, it's
really is an incredible project.
yeah,
I'm very. I think I wasn't there from the beginning, but I sort of got in at the right time. I'm very happy to have been a part of this.
yeah,
It's the last few years have been incredible.
yeah,
It's
certainly so.
100K, 20% down. That's
Yeah. I mean, we were nervous about asking for 500,000. It's especially for a strange organization like us. It's a big ask, right? It's an ambitious goal. Um,
But to put it in
but
context, there's been plenty of like centristy think tanks who haven't really done anything yet, who've suddenly got 5 to 10 mil in seed funding.
yeah, yes,
You
not to
know,
name names. There is an organization that recently got like $4 million in funding before they had even started, and that was certainly on our minds when we were like, we just need to go out and ask for at least
yeah,
500,000.
yeah, that's so where I've landed is like I think we all have a bit of an instinctual discomfort about asking for money. And no one thinks this is ideal. But the alternative, I mean, the rights funding model is not
Yeah,
just getting paid for by billionaires, right? Actually, a lot of what it is just scamming their audience. Oh, here's these gold coins, here's these survival vault seeds or
yeah,
whatever, just selling them bullshit. And I think
yeah,
actually the way the Ben Shapiro's of the world make their money is just that very snake oil salesman type stuff. That's how
yeah,
they extract revenue from their audience. Now, obviously, that's not going to be how we do it.
yeah,
Um, the other method is to paywall stuff, which I'm not against on principle. If you want to charge for your product, fine.
yeah,
But I think with what we're doing, we want to reach as many people as possible. We want the casual click to read the thing. Like I write for Liberal Currents because I want people to read it. I
right.
did the trans article for you guys because there was just nothing in the UK press really breaking it down, and I wanted there to be. You know, but then that sort of leaves us every now and again we have to fundraise, and I think the response I did a appeal on Blue Sky yesterday where I ran the two together. I have a goal of I want to get to 100 paid supporters for my podcast by the end of the year, and I did both. I was like, here's why this is important. Um, I'm doing a fundraiser, Liberal Currents is doing a fundraiser. And from what I was seeing from just, I won't name anybody, but just like the names on your GoFundMe and the names on my Patreon, like quite a few people did both, which
Both,
is
yeah.
incredible.
People are
Like,
mad. People are mad, and people want alternatives.
yeah, yeah. Here's my pitch. I'm at 67 now, which is incredible. So I'm on the home stretch, 30 odd to go. I want to devote more time to this. I want to get back to a regular schedule of one podcast a week. I've already seen a lot of traction on my YouTube, which is just literally the podcast with like a still image. It's not even video. So, but I mean, people are watching them, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
So I feel like there's got to be more there, especially in
yeah,
like, I think short form video as a
yeah,
way to reach a larger audience and draw people in. Um, we need an opposition media. You want to be an Atlantic that is genuinely liberal. I want to
yeah,
be
yeah.
an Ezra Klein that is actually liberal. I don't think we're ever going to have a liberal Joe Rogan. I think that's just not our thing. But
That's
let's
not a
let's
thing.
let's have an actually liberal Ezra Klein. I think that's my sort of pitch.
Yeah, yeah. That's pretty much our pitch. Yeah, we the Atlantic is sort of the target, right? Like that's the dream is let's just dislodge them from their perch, and and have something like Liberal Currents being the one that has their position within the liberal center left media ecology. Probably 500,000 won't get us there, but it's a big first step in that direction.
That's the kickoff point. We need to institutionalize. It
Yeah,
can't.
exactly.
We need to go beyond being hobbyists. And we're asking people to put us there. And I think we both have a little eye roll and smile on our face when we see be the Atlantic or yeah, be the sort of next big ideas podcast or our little aspirations for ourselves. But we're in a very extreme moment, and maybe we need to just have extreme ambitions, and the right
Yeah,
certainly do.
agree,
They're not
agree.
scared of just throwing big ideas out there and saying we're going to go for this. I think
Yeah,
we have to too.
agreed.
All right, everyone, I will drop the links to do both of those things in the show notes. We've devoted a bit of time to talking about it. I think it's genuinely important. If you can do both for either amount, please do.